Welcome, everybody, on behalf of the National Career Development Association. Welcome to our first presidential series. We are pleased that you have joined us this evening. Before we get started, I want to share some quick technical information with you. During the webinar, I ask that all attendees keep their microphones muted. We encourage any questions that come up during the webinar to be typed into the chat section, which can be found in the lower section of your screen. Our presenters will address those questions at the end of the presentation. Individuals who have signed up for this webinar will be able to log into their account on the NCDA website to view their CE transcripts beginning next week. Groups that are attending will need to return their sign-in sheets to me in order to receive their certificates. This program is approved for 1 contact hour of continuing education. For any questions on continuing education, you can contact me, Alicia Cheek, at NCDA headquarters. My contact information was included in your webinar instructions email. I will now turn it over to NCDA President Sharon Givens to introduce our speaker.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alicia. And good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. I am Sharon Givens, the president of NCDA, and I want to say welcome to the presidential series, and thank you so much for taking some time to invest in yourself tonight and your professional development. I have a great guest here tonight. She's actually not new to NCDA, but she is a future of work expert, Dr. Yvonne Thayer, and we're excited to have her tonight. And I'm going to give her an opportunity to actually tell you a little bit more about herself. Yvonne?
Thank you so much, Sharon. And I'm so pleased to be here with everyone. This is a great organization, and I've really enjoyed working with all of the leadership and members over the last year in various events. My background is pretty varied. I've been in education in one form or the other my whole career. I started out in K-12 and was in local district leadership. And my interest always was in pushing the envelope, trying to take a futurist viewpoint of what was going on. And I did a lot of work in career and technical education because I always felt like those kids that were in those programs often were forgotten or didn't get as many resources. And later I went on to the State Department in Virginia. I worked in policy, I worked in leadership, but then I went over to adult ed and I was director of adult education for the state. And I really found a new passion for what I was interested in, and that was workforce development. So over the past few years, I've really focused my work there. And now I do consulting and research in that area with different groups like workforce development groups or colleges and universities or local school districts. So I think this is the time too, that all of us who have some role in career development have an opportunity to make a real difference. So I'm pleased to be here.
So thank you very much. So as all of you can see, she is an expert in the future of work. And, you know, our thoughts behind this particular series is to think about what's happening right now in the world of work. And what better time than now for us to talk about the future of work. So I think, Yvonne, could you just start by telling us the story of what's happening with work, and where do you see work going?
Okay, and you know, I'm going to do that by starting to read a little story about a worker.
Okay.
One of the things that I didn't mention, I and 2 other authors, we published a book last year called Career Anxiety, and it was written for workers to help people understand what's going on. And we have several little stories within it about workers. And I'm just going to read you one. It's very short to kind of set the stage for talking about what you'd like to hear. This is about Gus, who is the 24-year-old. He has a full beard, a pleasant smile, a BA from a well-known private college, and $47,000 in debt to show for it. Although Gus earned good grades, he graduated with a 3.17. and completed an unpaid internship with a public affairs company specializing in political campaigns. He has not been able to land a job in his field. Gus has certainly tried to find a job. He has a weekly ritual. Every Monday, he reviews the online job boards and applies for jobs for which he is qualified. A few months ago, he stopped caring about whether the jobs were of interest to him because he felt that that would expand the pool of possible jobs. As of last Monday, Gus had applied for 237 jobs in 114 weeks since he graduated. Those applications have yielded only 5 interviews, and all but one were conducted by phone or web conferencing. Gus has received the message that he lacks experience and laments that he can't get experience without a job and can't get a job without experience. To pay the bills and begin paying off his student debt, Gus continues to work as a barista at the same coffee shop where he worked 2 years ago during his last year of college. To earn even more money, he has a side hustle, a secondary part-time job that would have been called moonlighting in an earlier time. He's driving for both Uber and Lyft. But as his father reminded Gus, this isn't a sustainable long-term strategy. So Gus is exploring law school. He has visited the websites of several law schools and has even started some applications. But he worries about 2 things. First, getting a law degree means taking on more debt. Although his grades and test scores are good enough for Gus to get in law school, they're not stellar enough for him to earn a scholarship. He's not sure he feels comfortable adding $100,000 or so to the $47,000 of debt he already has. And he's been reading that employment options in the legal profession aren't what they used to be. Fewer jobs offer lower pay than in the past. Should Gus continue down the law school path? Does he have other options? Or have coffee and cars become his career? That's a story that takes many forms with our millennials today. And we could have a story that would be similar for people in their 40s who are looking to change jobs and are beginning to realize it's not as easy as they thought it would be when they have a couple of decades of experience, because they're running into ageism beginning in the mid 40s and in the early 50s. And that is really true. That's not exaggerated. We find it all the time with both men and women, that it's harder to make that change than they thought it would be. So Gus did the right things. He went to college, he got his degree, he's got some skills, and he pursued a job and did the job boards just like he's supposed to do. And he borrowed money because he had to. And now 2 years later, he's at a crossroads. So he's not getting a job in his field. He's not getting a job in any sustainable, well-paying field. Does he go back to school and earn another degree and begin another career path? Does he go into greater debt, more than he wants? What did he do wrong? Should he go see a career counselor? I mean, you know, what is going on here with this? And again, this is happening all the time. And more younger people are going back to graduate school when they shouldn't, because they feel like if they just get one more degree, that third master's degree, and they really won't even listen very well when some of their professors say, you know, that's not the problem here. You know, it's not that one more degree that matters, it's your skill level.
Right.
So that's kind of where we are. So it's playing out in lots of different ways that we'll talk about this evening, but that's one of the big ones that some of you probably are confronted with, either in your family or with your friends or in your professional life. So let's talk about 3 things, 3 big changes that have occurred that are impacting people like Gus and our clients. The first is what some have called the 4th Industrial Revolution. I call it the digital transformation. It started about in the early 90s as the kind of the computer period ended, and everybody was finally getting their computers in place and getting used to working that way. Along comes this digital transformation. We saw it in globalization beginning in the 90s and became very talked about in the early 2000s. We saw a digital disruption in all of our jobs, every sector, every place we looked, there was some kind of disruption that either began when computers came in, but some kind of automation that really began leading to transformation, either in the products that were developed, the services organizations had, or the way work was done. And one of the byproducts of this, of course, was needing fewer workers in certain kinds of jobs because you could automate those jobs. And that's still what's happening, all the time. Is fewer jobs are needed in certain kinds of skills. This automation, artificial intelligence, and augmented work, which is the big thing now, where people will be working beside a computerized, either a robot or some other kind of software, but work together on something. This is all part of what's occurring that is both exciting and troubling for people. And for companies that have to have the money to do these things, but also have to do it to compete internationally and stay in business. Of all the industrial revolutions that this country has seen, the thing that is truly different about this one is the velocity of change. The fact that everything has happened so quickly. Now, if we look back at the implementation of computers in the workplace and in the home, took about from the early 1980s up until about the mid 1990s before it really, and you can still name some places that it took a little bit longer for people to accept, I have to understand how to do this. I'm going to have to use it in my job. It has a function that's important in this work. This doesn't work the same way with digital technology. It can happen immediately and very, very quickly. And really almost as soon as somebody has an idea, if they have the right tools, they can make it happen. Mm-hmm. This is what I think a lot of millennials in particular have looked at, that in the surveys of millennials, a large percentage of them say they want to be entrepreneurs. They see that as, the path they want to take. And so we have to recognize that, not that they all can do that, but that's kind of what they're thinking. So that was one big part of the change that occurred. And then another one was the change in the life of the worker. What happened to the worker over the last 20 years in particular? The skilling up, the fact that you have to reskill all the time. I think everybody here knows that's important. It's a message that you've got to give your clients, especially I think people who are in the middle skill area need to hear this, because they tend to think, well, you go to the community college, you get that certification, you pass the test, you're good to go. And what everybody has to recognize is we're going to be skilling up and reskilling the rest of our work lives, because all of these changes are going to continue to take place. And if you aren't willing to do it, you're not going to have the opportunity either to work, keep your job, or move to the kind of position you'd like to have. So that's one thing that happened to workers. Another one thing that happened that really has made a huge impact in this country is that we now value the shareholder more than we value the worker. There was a social contract that started in this country really in the 40s, but became very apparent after World War II, where companies hired workers and they kept those workers. So when the jobs changed, they just reskilled people or moved them over to something else, but they didn't let people go. They didn't fire people. The whole idea was, we have this company and we want these people to work for us. And that's why people's grandparents or parents worked in these companies their whole careers. That day is gone. And not only does that change the feeling and attitude workers have toward their employers, because nobody feels any commitment to stay with an employer any longer, but the employer has no commitment to the worker. Now, even when they're going through hard times like they are now to find people to work for them, the kinds of incentives they're giving are very short-sighted. I'm going to pay you $1,000 to come work here, if you can start this week. But that's one time. That's not really dealing with some of the issues around that. And I think those issues play in to how people have felt about why they wanted to change jobs during the pandemic. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then the third thing that has changed so much, I think, is the shrinking workforce. And a lot of people don't really recognize that yet, because they don't understand what's going on. And they're thinking, well, people just have quit jobs. They want to quit their jobs and they want to do something else. And that's that, but it's bigger than that. We have the smallest workforce coming about now than we've really had since many, many, many decades ago. And we have the smallest growth ever. That is because of several things, one of which is our birth rate has been lower. So we actually didn't have the babies and didn't have the people. So there's no way, short of immigrants, others coming into this country, that we can create more people in the workforce. So it's not like you can just make up people, and that's a big part of this. But there's some other things going on. We have fewer men who are in that prime working age in, fewer people working now, men, than should be and that have ever been. We haven't had real growth in the number of men in the workforce since the baby boomers, my age, started working. That's a long time ago. So we need to recognize that. And that does present more opportunities for women. Mm-hmm. But that problem continues to be that women aren't paid what men are paid. And again, we saw the women leaving the workforce during the pandemic, and now that's, part of that. Mm-hmm. We also have a health and opioid crisis in this country that's taking people out of the workforce, and those numbers are high, and we need to recognize that. We have people incarcerated and people that have, problems in their history that they can't get employed. Those are real. And the only real solution right now that people are looking at is that people will work longer. People will work into and through their 70s. They'll be able to do that because many will be healthier. And also there will be many people who will want to do that because they will need the money to support themselves. They may have to support children. They may have really elderly parents in their 90s that they need to support. There are all kinds of things that are going to be going on that will create this different looking kind of workforce. So all of those things, those are some of the things that make up these changes that mean that you can't tell the same story that you told 20 years ago, or even really 10 years ago, people. We can't, you in terms of you, but all of us in this field, we have to look differently. What does a resume mean? When we have the technology now that employers can find out everything about us. So what do we need to know? Well, we need to know how to work with job boards in a very smart way, because employers that have access to the algorithms that run those job boards can manipulate those if at all, it's under their choosing to get who they want without you ever knowing why you weren't chosen or what that automated person that interviewed you, the automated bot, what happened with that interview. Those are some of the things I think that really feed into all of this, Sharon, about what's different now. There are many, many things, but those are some of the things I just wanted to bring up.
Excellent. I have a couple questions that I'd like to kind of explore from the information that you shared. I like what you talked about in terms of upskilling, because of course now we know there's certain jobs that require more skills. And I'm wondering, how do people balance that without making these huge investments or going into debt, as you talked about, in your initial story? Mm-hmm. So I need these skills to get this job. And of course, the only way to be a lawyer is to what? To go to law school. Yeah. The only way to be a doctor is to go to med school. And so how do we balance, and even other jobs that are not maybe that extensive in terms of investing time or money, but how do we balance that and get the skills?
Yeah, that is a tough one. It's a really good question, because I always tell people it's important to talk about this with workforce clients so they understand that when they are budgeting things through their life, they're going to have to set aside some money to do this. But I think the encouraging thing is, what I've seen in the last couple of years in particular, is more employers are willing to pay for these kinds of the skilling up. It's not quite the same as when an employer just pays for you to go get 2 credits of something you want to go get 2 credits in, or 2 units, you know what I mean? But when they see that it's a skill that can serve them in their company or organization, and it's something that might, even if you don't need it now, you might benefit in a couple of years from it. I think the employers are much more willing to do that. And also people are negotiating for that. Now, we can talk about the talent, the search for talent and that race that's being run right now for the people who are the most skilled on the highest end of the continuum. They can get almost anything they want. And the kinds of things they're negotiating for are just mind-blowing to me, because they're kind of negotiating away some of the kinds of benefits that we thought everybody wanted to have. And they're asking for other things like more vacation time, more flexibility to do community service. And one of the things they're asking for, is to have, they want to learn. We have generations now in the millennials and Gen Z in particular that want to learn. We've done a good job, I suppose, in K-12, really pushing that and working more in groups. So, but they want somebody to pay for it for them. So I think we can ask for it. That's one thing. But I think the other thing would be to have a good career plan, if not on paper, at least, in your head. What is it? Where do I really want to head? Now, it's not the same model that we used to have where you just go up the ladder in a company and, you start out here and eventually you'll get up here. No, it's moving all these different directions and among more than one employer. But I think if you have an idea of what you want to do and you think about it that way, then the opportunities might, you can be on the lookout for that. But it's a challenge. I tell you, this student debt thing is a huge problem in this country, and we are doing nothing right now to really, seriously address it. And that is a problem that I think counselors need to really think about talking with people about.
Right. And so it sounds like a couple of things I want to mention, that a lot of this work has to begin in K through 12. And that's from looking at where do you want to go? How do you prepare yourself even financially at some point, and working with the parents to navigate the process as well. Something else that you said that really resonated about the whole shrinking workforce and the social contracts. I'm wondering, what role does the gig economy play in this? Because there are people they're working per se, but they're working for themselves on multiple contracts, but they're not working for one employer. So what are your thoughts on that?
One of the biggest changes that I found when we did the research for this book, we looked very closely at contract workers, gig workers, all the, people with sidelines. And what we saw was that probably in another 2 or 3 years, we'll have, if not sooner, at least 60% of the workforce that'll be working more than one job. And it'll probably get higher. And, if you have a full-time job and you take on a sideline, that's one thing. But if you do nothing but contract work and these gig jobs, that's a whole different world because of all the responsibility you have for taxes and that kind of thing. But also because you really aren't in a career path of any kind. You're just, you're there. Now, sometimes people who are retired or working contract, again, that's a different situation. But I have also found with younger people, they leave full-time jobs to take contract jobs because they look at how much money am I earning right now, not how much are these benefits worth. Or, maybe I don't like working here so much, but I'll wait it out until I do get a full-time job again. But there's a different mindset. And I think it's because, again, no one really talks with them about that, what the options are and what the liabilities are. And it goes not just with things like, driving for Lyft, but people who like to be kind of nomad workers, work somewhere else in the country, take my laptop, sit at the beach, sit in the mountains, whatever, and just, work that way. it gives you a lifestyle perhaps you want, but you do have to think about long-term. Is this going to pay off for me when I do decide I need to go back in and get something else? So I think what we need to do is be sure that we explain to our clients what it means to be a contract worker, whether it means that you're a high-level consultant or you're doing your little sideline. When is it advantageous to do it? It's very advantageous to do it to begin something, if you're not already, in your early 50s. Because if you have some skills that you want to develop that can turn into a consultancy when you retire, or you have a hobby or some other interest and you want to develop something around that, that's a really good time to do it. That's not to say you can't do it before then, but I do think people just don't always ask all the questions. So,
yeah. Because I think a lot of people look at flexibility as compensation to them that they have.
That's right. Yes, you're exactly right. That's exactly how they look at it. Yeah. And of course, that's what's going on too with the remote work.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Yvonne, I have a question for you. What do we need to do as career development professionals? Because this is very important for us to be prepared. It doesn't matter what sector or constituency group that you are in, but what do we need to do as career development professionals to prepare for the future of work?
Well, you know, we were, one of the other presentations, a question similar to that came up because people, I think, don't know what resources are available or, you know, what is, how to even begin this. And, you know, I could say, well, you could do what we did, wrote the book and you just read everything out there and you can see, but of course that's not realistic. So I think there are a couple of things. One, just be open to it and understand things are changing and you need to know as much as you can, but don't go out on a limb too much until you understand what's happening. And you can do that by talking with employers in the area where you live or that you're involved with in organizations. Just kind of check out things. You know, I've heard this is going on. Is that happening with you? You know, I've heard that there are a lot of women not returning to work that quit during the pandemic. Is that the same thing that you're seeing? You can do that. I've got a few resources to suggest because I think that might be helpful too. And I don't want to give you a long list of things, but I picked a couple things I thought could be helpful to think about because I expected that question to come back up. There are several organizations that are research organizations and consulting groups that do a wonderful job either conducting research on the workforce and the workplace or they report it. And the two I would recommend to you to read are either McKinsey and Company or PwC, which used to be Price Waterhouse. Both of them have wonderful reports that I think meet the standard generally of having enough people in a study that you really can feel like you're learning something from it. And they're not biased. And they really cover so many different topics. You could just go through their website and just look at the reports they've done over the last couple of years and see all kinds of things that you might be interested in. But you can scan their things or look at their executive summaries, and that would give you some of the big picture on where things are going. You'll find on blogs and sometimes even organizations that just want to write a little something about it. They're basically using those research articles and commenting on it. So you'll get the good stuff that way. Then I would suggest that you have some kind of a daily update. And I would recommend Google's Future of Work group, because every day you just get some real quickies that you can either go in and read a whole article if you want to, or you just, again, kind of refresh where you're going with it. And they did, like today I was looking and they had one that dealt with high school students. You might not see that again for a week, but you know, they did different things, something on women, something on something very specific, like what's going on with autonomous vehicles. So that kind of opportunity that you can spend 10 or 15 minutes on a day it will help you because you'll start realizing, I'm seeing these same topics come through, different takes on it, but this must be a real thing that I need to know about. So I would suggest that. And then for people that are particularly interested in job seeking and hiring, there are a couple of HR places I would recommend. One is the HR Executive Newsletter, and the other one is called HR Dive. And that's, again, one of these places where they go in and look for all the things that are out there and give you a quick picture. I think that's the way to do it because everybody has a lot to do in the job they have, and they can't sit around for a couple hours a day reading this stuff. But that'll give you a pretty good picture, I think.
Really good, because I think sometimes as career development professionals, we have training and education, but it seems like we need to get educated specifically on the future of work, and I appreciate those resources. So a couple of other things I'd like to ask before we go to questions tonight. So there's 3 themes right now I feel like that are buzzing. And of course, remote work, the pandemic, the great resignation. How are all of those going to play a part, a role in the future of work?
Let's start with the pandemic.
Okay.
We were finishing up our book right as the pandemic got started. And there were things that we saw coming, and like remote work, we knew that was coming, and we knew it would have a huge impact on companies, but we didn't know it was coming now. And we didn't know, right then the impact it would have because it would be everybody instead of some here, everybody. So the telework or remote work, that's here to stay. The people who are applying for jobs are demanding it. Even companies who had managers that wanted people to come back in, they're getting satisfied to say something, well, we'll come in once a week or twice a week, or your team to meet, when you need to meet inside. But quite frankly, they found out that people did good work at home. And even though I didn't like the fact that a lot of companies put trackers on people and monitored them, I found people found their workarounds for that too. So I think the telework is a norm now. It's the norm. And it has a huge impact on other things like, where you can look for a job, all that. The fact that several million women quit their jobs and have not returned to work is probably, there's going to be a long-term impact there. Now, it looks like what a lot of the women were saying was that they just felt like they had to be home because of their families. They were under stress. They couldn't handle it. And it was just better to quit and do that at home, but they haven't rushed back. And it may be the types of jobs some of these women were in, because a lot of them were in lower skilled jobs or lower paying jobs. So they may be holding out for something else, something better. I think the rate of inflation and what happens with housing, because we're in for, I think, a huge hit on housing. We don't have affordable housing in this country. It's going to make a difference about people going back to work. But for right now, those women are kind of holding back. One of the things that also happened during the pandemic was e-commerce grew tremendously. We all just sat home and just ordered everything. And it really is sticking. It helped break the supply chain, caused problems there because the supply chain wasn't ready for that. And then the impact of other countries having COVID, we had big problems with that. And that's going to continue. It'll take a while to get that back, but I think in a year or so, that'll be okay. But those kinds of things with the pandemic about who's working. I read a piece in an article this last week about a woman who she probably was kind of middle skilled job, office job, I think. And she quit her job without having another job, thinking she would have no problem because she heard how many jobs were open. And now it's several weeks later and she has no job. That's something we need to think about when we're talking to our clients about when do you make a job change and how do you be, you're smart about that. And that just because there are a lot of jobs open, that may not be the jobs you either are qualified for or that you want. We all know that there are lots of home health care, those kinds of jobs available, but the pay, not what you want. Anyway, the pandemic, we've got those things going. And then the Great Resignation. It's kind of the talent meets stress kind of thing. And we still have over 4 million people resigning each month. I think that's very interesting given that the pandemic has cooled, but it shows that the workforce issues have not. In February, 4.4 left their job, and yet there were 11.3 million openings. It's a buyer's market for the person who's skilled. And it's also a buyer's market if you want to work at a fast food restaurant. But if you're in the middle somewhere, it's a little different. So we've got that. And then the remote work. Workers like it. Like I said, it's here to stay. It saves time. It saves gas, which matters right now. It allows you to work in different locations. And what we're seeing is the large numbers of people are still moving and preparing to move. And they're going away from the urban areas into smaller cities.
Right.
And because they can get those jobs that they're still within 50 miles and they only would have to go in once or twice a week, it's having an impact there. So the job search is broadening, and that might be something, again, for our folks to think about, that when we're talking with our clients, how do you make a decision? Yeah, in our book, we talked a lot about you can't just go off and move someplace, because if your job depends on your being there and you lose that job and there you are, and it's a more expensive city, all those things. But if people now have the flexibility to live where it's a little more affordable, that's going to make a big difference in how you view where you live and what your job is. I think that's kind of where we are with it.
So it almost sounds like the employee is going to have a lot more power, maybe in the future of work and at some level.
They're having it already, and it was a surprise to me because what I was seeing was because we had broken the social contract. I saw workers needing unions like they'd never needed them before, things like that were happening. But now it looks different, at least for the short term. And again, because we don't have as many workers, it's not as competitive. If you've got the skills, you can do very, very well.
Interesting. So if you had to leave us with maybe 2 or 3 tips or additional resources, perhaps things that we can start tuning into right away that could help us navigate this whole scope of the future of work, what would that be?
I think that first, looking at your professional organization, that you should use the time you have as professionals when you are together, virtually or otherwise, for conferences and things like that, to have groups that meet together and talk about these issues and develop resources to help each other. Because right now, I don't think there are many things out there. And I see the HR people beginning to do a lot of this. And I think it would be helpful, for your organization to look at what do people need to help them and put some of that together and have opportunities to talk about it and say, well, this is what I'm seeing in my area. Well, I'm seeing this in my area. The second thing I mentioned before about checking in with your employers. You need to be involved in some of these organizations of these employers that are either technology groups that meet or other kinds of, sometimes you'll have, like in my area, there's a group of all the construction companies and they're formed into a group. I think it would be very helpful to talk with these people and just listen to them, because I know when I was doing research early on, I had the opportunity to sit with some folks, and we talked about what had happened after the Great Recession in terms of when they finally came back and started hiring, and they weren't hiring full-time, doing contract, and they really confirmed some of this information. So I think that would be a good thing to do, to really connect up with those folks. And if you're doing job fairs and those kinds of activities for students or workers, depending on your venue, talk about these real issues. Don't just, fill out a resume or worry about wearing a blue suit. Talk about these things, have these employers talk about why it's important to show that you really care about your job, not only that you're there on time, but that you get your work done. And regardless of, we don't have to watch you punch a clock anymore. You're working from home, but it's getting done. I just think the employers have the message for us, and right now would be a good time to involve them in that. Other than that, I would say, just again, find the resource that makes the most sense to you to keep you daily getting some information about this, so you feel like you know what's going on, and not be surprised when you get out there and hear these other things. Parents do not know what to say or do. When I talk with them, they're kind of shocked that their experience doesn't work for helping their kids. And, they need the support from us more than I guess we've ever done it before. If you're working with older folks, the middle-aged person is shocked by the fact they can't just go out and change jobs easily. And older people need to understand, really starting in your 50s, that you probably aren't going to retire as early as you thought, and get prepared for what that looks like. That can make sense, get you the money you need, but also make you feel good about working later in your life.
Right. Because I think as the National Career Development Association, it is important for us to have this conversation. Whether you're working with, elementary students or, students in college. And I have to say that's one of the things that I made up my mind that I was going to be very intentional about, that I would at least try to open the door for this conversation for our constituents, because I think it's very, very relevant. I think that we will no longer be operating and delivering services in the same way that we were before. Things are changing, and they're changing daily. And it's important for us, if we are leading the way as career development professionals, for us to know as much as possible about this topic. And
don't be afraid, don't be afraid of it. You may say, well, artificial intelligence, augmented work, I don't really care about that. Well, you don't have to be an expert in it to understand enough about it to know the impact on work. And that's really what it's all about, is what's the impact on a worker going to be when we have all of this going on in the workplace. So just play around with it.
And you just said, don't be afraid, but I think you're right. I think the workers are afraid, and I imagine even some of the career development professionals are afraid, because we will have to navigate maybe in areas and deliver services again in a way that we haven't done before. So I think there is going to be a level of fear maybe for both. So that's a very, very good point there. But I think the more we become educated, like you said, I think that can reduce, hopefully, some of that fear.
Yeah, someone just put up fear and learning curve, and learning curve is a big part of it too.
Good. I think Alicia, I think we're ready now maybe to get a few questions from our participants. I believe we had a couple that may have dropped a few in there while we were talking. So
sure, I can jump in and read the questions for you. We have one so far from Eugenie Lewis. I apologize if I said that incorrectly. She says, number one, do you still recommend higher education when you have to take on so much debt?
Well, here's the deal. We all know that there are certain jobs that require degrees. That's just how that is. And as long as you're being smart about what you're majoring in and that you are looking at something that will pay off, of course we want people to do that. But I do think that we had a lot of people that went to college who never understood why they were going. They were going when I can remember being in a school improvement program where we would ask kids in the middle grades about, what are you going to do after high school? I'm going to college. Well, why are you going to college? Well, my parents say I'm going to college. I don't know why I'm going, but I'm going to college. And we did a good job selling that in this country, that everybody should go to college. Well, now, we really have to rethink that. And of course, we want to have enough professionals, but we also don't want too many. Like right now, we do have too many attorneys. There are all kinds of applications that do the work of paraprofessionals now and do it faster and around the clock. So you have to look at every career and figure out what kind of job makes sense. Now, the rub is doing what I want to do, my passion, versus a job that pays well. And once again, we can't be in a position of telling anybody what to do, but we can ask the questions for them to ponder. Does it make sense for me to do something where I'm going to struggle every day? Is it worth it to do that? If it is, okay. But if there aren't many jobs that are available for something like that, and at least in the short term, you could find something to do that would be much more beneficial if you want, especially if you want to have a family and you want to support the kind of lifestyle that most people in this country want. You may have to make those decisions. It's very difficult. And now the business of debt is another issue. And again, when people go back to get advanced degrees, I see it all the time. They graduate from college, they can't find a job, so they immediately go to graduate school. And all that really does, it might be the answer for them, but it may just be adding more debt. And then when you talk with people who have so much student debt that the payment plan goes to age 55 and they can't buy a house and they don't even know how they can have children. I mean, something's got to give, right? So these are important issues to talk about. Do you see a growth in green careers? Possibly. I don't know that there's anything right now that shows that that necessarily is going to be big, but I'm not an expert on that. Does networking still work to seek the hidden job market? Yes, yes, yes. We believe that networking is key to getting any job right now. It's very key. What are the top 5 skills people need to cultivate? There are some skills that are common across all the jobs. And then of course, there's some skills, especially hard skills, that are very specific to certain jobs. What the employers will tell you right now is the 2 biggest ones are problem solving and adaptability. And adaptability really came about during the pandemic. We weren't hearing as much about it until the pandemic. And then when all of a sudden you had to work at home, you had to learn how to work at home, you had to be responsible for things in a different way, you had to have team meetings on Zoom and other things. Adaptability was key, because if you couldn't adapt on the spot, you weren't going to be able to be successful working. But adaptability is bigger, and adaptability really looks at what employers have to do to stay in business, because employers are competing internationally in almost every case. Somehow it's a global network and global workplace. And so employers have to change their products and services rapidly sometimes to survive. That calls for adaptability among everybody from the top all the way down. But it also means that the people who come in with a set of skills that they bring, they really need to be able to show that they can be adaptable, that it doesn't throw them. I've known people that I worked supervised in my past who clearly could not have done that. They just were stuck in this mold of this is what I do and this is how I do it. The problem solving is so important because all we do now really is solve problems to create better things. And then it's communications. It's always communications that you hear employers talk about and that you probably experience as well. Can you talk to people in a way that they can understand you and you can understand them, that you can communicate effectively? I think those are the big ones. Will you talk a little bit more about networking as a strategy to find a job? In addition to having the right skills, would you say something would be more successful at finding a good fit if you have a strong professional network? What type of networks? Online, LinkedIn, and others? It's hard to say the very best because my experience is that I'm still benefiting from networks that I interacted with or people that I interacted with 20, 30 years ago, and surprised that they're still paying off in the most unexpected ways for me. And it doesn't mean that you have to stay, you don't have to be talking to people all the time. You can have those gaps in time, but and I think LinkedIn is one of the keys for that. So I like LinkedIn a lot for that. And I think they offer a lot of pieces in there that help with that. I don't know in terms of when you're just doing cold call kinds of things with people, of how well that works on any online network if people don't know you. I still think that the network that's established by people working together, I see you, I know what it's like, the way you work. I've worked with you. I know what our project looked like. I know how I filled in some of your weaknesses. You filled in some of my weaknesses. Those are the things that I think make the biggest difference. So there are a lot of networking strategies that I've read about that, you can explore. But the strategy for finding a job is I think you have to understand those job boards and those automated systems. I think you have to understand that employers are scraping data all the time to find out about people who've applied for jobs. So nothing is hidden. And that message needs to be communicated as early as we can communicate it to people in the pipeline beginning, in the early grades. Be very careful about what you post and what's online about you. But I will just say that I would look at some of the experts on networking. I know there's some people, I think we mentioned one in our book who's an expert in that, and look for what they have to say, because this is changing all the time. And what companies are doing now is really expecting everything to be housed in one place that shows not only all of your experience, but every course you've taken, every badge you've earned, every paper you've written, every team you've been on, just so, that's portable, you can share it, and that helps to, build your capacity to get the job. All right, do you have information about trades and outlook for tradesmen, even with automation and robotics being introduced in hard labor industries? We think the trades are in pretty good shape if we could get enough people to go into them. Every time I hear somebody make the comment, well, the schools stopped teaching those good vocational courses, and so we don't have enough tradesmen because the schools don't teach the courses. Well, that's not what happened at all. What happened was the students wouldn't take the trades courses. They were much more interested in STEM courses, engineering courses, other things that were part of CTE, but not the trades as we think of them. But, if you've had anybody in that's a plumber or anybody in to do any electrical work, you know that they're making a very good living. I think we have to reframe this with a lot of people to show them that it's not just about learning to be an electrician or work on air conditioning. It's about you can create your own company. You can build your own, be your own boss after you develop these skills. And I'm not sure we do a very good job of that, but we could. But I think we need the tradespeople. And even though they have tools and some automation to help them in their work, I don't see that making a huge difference anytime soon. Where the investments are with automation are primarily in the kinds of jobs we see in offices, manufacturing, and those kinds of things. Okay. I think that's it.
All right. We have about 5 more minutes. If anybody has any more questions for Yvonne, we can get those answered for you. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and do a few quick announcements real quick in case anybody is typing those up. Yvonne and Sharon, thank you for that presentation today. That was great, wonderful information. Again, everybody that's attending, your continuing education will be transferred over into your NCDA account early next week when you can access those transcripts. And if you have any questions about continuing education, you can email me. My name is Alicia Cheek. I'm at NCDA headquarters. And it looks like that is it. So Yvonne and Sharon, thank you again. And thank you everybody for attending. And I hope everybody has a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much for attending. And we hope to see you or listen and on our upcoming podcasts on various career development topics. So please keep your eyes and ears open for information on our upcoming podcasts, presidential series in the future. Thank you so much.